John crewed on boats in the Transpac 4 or 5 times, and he always said it was like being on a vacation. John and his brother Pete won first overall in the 1978 Ensenada race from Newport Beach to Ensenada in Pete's Bristol Channel cutter. It's very fitting that this celebration be held here at Corinthian Yacht Club. In conversation with Janet, she remarked that after retiring from Hughes Aircraft in the 1980s, CYC became his life. It encompassed the things he enjoyed most, his friendships along with sailing and racing boats, and studying the bay tides and currents as an advantage to racing. There's that analytical mind at work again. And spending his days with friends and family. It has often been noted that John and George Bertisevich would be the last ones to leave the clubhouse, head out to the race course, win the race, and be the first ones back to the clubhouse. Prior to sailing and racing with George, John's son Ken, as well as Kathleen Barr, were John's loyal crew for many years. Very important to mention this, as it is something John was very proud of. Until the last few years, John would not wear anything on his head when sailing. He had to feel the wind in his ears to follow the direction and strength of the breeze. John and Janet were together for 63 years and married for 61 of them. In his youth in Southern California, John came up with a plan to use his snipe to ferry boat owners out to their vessels on moorings in Santa Monica Bay. For a small fee, of course. John met Janet on Santa Monica Pier. John's brother Peter lived in the same boarding house as Janet up the street from the pier and would occasionally go out for walks together or perhaps the occasional beer. Anyway, one day in 1949, Pete and Janet walked down to the pier, and it so happened that John was sailing his snipe in the bay. Peter called him over and introduced him to Janet, and John took Janet sailing in the snipe that very day. He called her the following week, and a few dates ensued before John's mom invited Janet over for dinner. That's when she knew it was getting serious. John received his bachelor's in mechanical engineering from UCLA, and for many years was a mechanical and electrical engineer with Hughes Aircraft in Culver City, and eventually a systems manager. This man, this wonderful sailor that we knew, had some other attributes. Assistant project engineer at Sperry Gyroscope, and after that, project group leader with Summers Gyroscope, chief engineer of instrument development with technical and administrative responsibility for all gyroscope development, as well as project director with Whitaker Gyro, administrating development of all multi-gimbal gyroscopes and systems. Now, if none of you really know exactly what I was saying, I'm right there with you. About the time of the Vietnam War, John helped develop night vision goggles for helicopter pilots. Quite a list of accomplishments and responsibilities. John had a Cal 20 that he berthed in Marina del Rey. Oftentimes after work, he would go down to the marina and go sailing, either with friends or alone, before going home rather than fighting the evening traffic. Before the Cal 20, there was the Dragon boat. One time, while at Catalina with the family, John spotted a new Cal 20. Gary recalled that he was very impressed with the accommodation and interior finishing of the Cal 20, although the Dragon boat had a beautiful wood interior. Shortly thereafter, John purchased a brand new Cal 20, and the rest is history, racing history. I know that Gary was unable to be here today. He's not feeling well, a little bit of the stomach flu. But there is another story that I'd like to relate, and I wish he was here to hear it. But there are so many stories about the life of this wonderful man during the years in Southern California, the many trips to Catalina on the Cal 20 with Ken and Gary and other friends. Gary, who at the time was small enough and young enough to put his arms out in front of him and swim out of the outboard well in the Cal 20. The young goat Gary refused to part with on the island and bringing it home aboard the boat. Janet actually raised that goat from a baby, bottle feeding and all. And she told me that when you've had an animal with hooves climb up onto your lap, well, not a pleasant memory. None of us is getting any younger, and I'd like to remind everyone that if you'd like to share stories of time spent with John, you're so invited to do so at this time. But let's remember to keep the stories brief in consideration of those that follow. Any volunteers? Please.
You go first. I'll follow you.
All right.
I was on the floor next.
All right.
I met John sailing Cal 20s and I was on Samsara at the time. And he said, jump ship and come on over. And everybody looked at me and went, what? You want to race on tension 2? He screams. He is also my husband, and he taught me how to sail, and I couldn't have had a better teacher. I had so many wonderful memories. Sorry. Going to Victoria. When he left Janet behind, or he tried to sneak in a case of wine, we were 3 hours at border control until they found wine. And almost arrested. To going to LA, to Hawaii with Ken. It was just the most awesome person in the world. And big missed.
My name is Ken Nooteboom, and I'm John's #1 son. And you haven't seen me around here a whole lot lately, but I was with Kathleen. We were the we were the main crew for a long time on the Cal 20, and we got a name around here. Prior to the Cal 20s, and after the Dragon, he was racing a boat called an Enterprise. And Enterprise was about 14 feet long, and it was didn't have a keel, it had a centerboard. And he was really good at it because he grew up racing or sailing boats in the Santa Monica Bay, and we used to sail most of the time in the Santa Monica Bay. And we used to win most of the time. And I was just talking to Pete Jr., and John's brother Pete decided he wanted to sail like that too, but he didn't want to sail against John, so he had a different kind of boat, Super Satellite. And Pete would win the Super Satellite races, and John would win the Enterprise races. And I was John's only crew then. I was like 12 years old, 13 years old. This was 1965, 66. And the anecdote I want to share with you is something that's stuck with me all my life, because as good as the sailor as you've seen him here, he was even better with the Enterprise. It was a smaller boat. He knew the Santa Monica Bay like the back of his hand, and people didn't really have a chance some of the time. But one time, there was about 12 boats who were lined up in a race, and it was a big race. I don't remember when exactly, but right at the start of the race, the boat, a gust of wind came and we capsized. And we'd never done that in a race before. I don't think he'd ever capsized a boat before. And I was just trying not to drown because we didn't have the life preservers or anything. But he jumped on the centerboard, stood up on it, right at the boat, and yelled at me to get in, and I did. And I started to bail, and we set the sails, and he had 2 little plugs in the transom just for that kind of situation. He pulled those out, and water started getting out the back, and we started racing, and one by one we picked off, there was like 10 or 11 boats in front of us, and we picked them off one at a time. In dogfight, we ended up finishing first. We won the race. And that was the best race that I'd ever been on. And I remember that to this day, that just don't give up. No matter what knocks you down, get up and keep fighting and get back in the race, literally. You know, so that's what I want to share.
Let me see some hands. Marcia?
Hi, my name is Marcia Peck. I met John Nooteboom in 1974. I was racing at Cal 20, which my husband and I raced for 15 years. It was our first boat. And I was the only woman skipper in the regatta at Alameda's Bay. And I cut John off at the mark and slammed the door. I was coming in on starboard, it was blowing because Alameda's blows, and he was trying to stick his nose in on port. And I said, no room. And I heard all the screaming and yelling and quick tack going on. And after that in the bar, this guy comes stomping up to me. He goes, "Who do you think you are?" And I said, "I'm Marcia Peck." And I said, "You got no room." And he goes, "Women don't belong in this sport." That was the first contact with John Nooteboom. Then I became the National Cal 20 president in '78 down in San Diego at the Nationals, which was a big drifter. And I was sweeping a lot and got a sunburn, but I remember going to the national meeting, and he stood up and he said, "Now we've got a woman president. What is this world coming to?" Well, we had many confrontations, and then he moved up here, and I'm like, "Oh, it's that guy." I went on to a J-24 and other boats, and John continued in Tension 2, and he was a heck of a sailor. I don't know that he ever really appreciated me, but now he's stuck in the same yacht club with me. Surprise! So, one day in the late 80s, I was out racing Solings, and it was a big deal. It was the Pacific Cup Championship. I'd borrowed the boat from Mark Murray. It was blowing stink in the Berkeley Circle. We were soaking wet. I really needed to go to the bathroom. We came in, just came screaming up to the dock. I ran in the club in my foul weather gear, and it was the cooks and waiters. And I ran right in the bar, and he was the first one to meet me. And he says, "You can't come in here." And I said, "Why not?" He says, "Because it's the cooks and waiters." I said, "I have to go to the bathroom." He says, "I don't care what you have to do, but you're getting it out of here." So I'm like, "I'm going downstairs, John, into the galley and the alley, okay? And I've been racing for you all weekend. What is this?" So I came out of the alley, and we're going to haul the Soling out and put it away. And he comes down and he goes, "It's okay." He says, "You're not so bad." But, you know, in the end, he softened. We actually became pretty good friends. Janet is a very good friend of mine, and he will be sorely missed because they just don't make them like that anymore.
I suppose one staff commenter ought to stand up and acknowledge a great sailor. My acquaintance with John was nowhere near as colorful or as deep or as wide. However, he was a director when I was Commodore. And so I understand the analytical mind, because he questioned everything that I said. I did a lot of dumb things, and he made certain that I knew that. And the other thing that I'll never forget about John Nooteboom, and this is somewhat serious, but you know, he just proved over and over again that sailing small boats is probably the best way to sail. You know, it's you and the boat, and the experience is incredible, and he showed that you can do great, great things with a 20-footer. And there's still a few of us small boat people around here, and he was one of the best. Thank you.
I wasn't going to let you get away with it.
I don't know what really came first, the rear end of John's boat or actually meeting him. For 25 years, brushed shoulders quite a bit on the dock and out on the water, having a Cal 20 myself. Back in the middle 80s when John and Janet first came up here, once a year we have a big boat series, and it was a big boat deal in the middle 80s. And I was wandering around over there. I crewed on one of these things. And up runs John, and I recognized him. He goes, hey, you know, don't you have a Cal 20? And whatever. Anyway, he said, come with me. I want to show you something. And I didn't really know too much about John other than I looked at his transom quite a bit. But he took me, and like I say, in the 80s, the big boat series was definitely a big deal. And so he took me down the dock, and the first boat we went on was Kealoha. He introduced me to Kilroy. That was pretty cool. And met Ben Mitchell, who was probably, I don't know, the predecessor to what Stan Honey is today. When it came to getting across the Pacific or down the coast, Mitchell was the guy. And Roy Disney, Pyewacket, John knew all these guys. And
it's an appropriate one, and I love talking about it. My very first sailboat race was with John.
Would listen to out in the race course. And as I found out later,
many other attributes, and had a depth of experiences and tales and love, and he was a great guy.
Offer 8 bells to John's memory. Let's each remember what his presence in our lives meant to us and how he enriched each of us in some way, many ways. I miscued Hans, and he's not walking too far. I share those words with you. They say, I think a lot about the man that John was. It's entitled A Few Words to John. You took us sailing on your Cal 20, and on fast regattas, what intense times we'd live. And on the way home, we ate at McDonald's. Hamburger, fries, and milkshakes, eaten while riding home in the back of your green station wagon. The best meals ever. And you helped Dad and us with our motorboat, always providing solutions for us. You clearly knew everything. I know, an engineer. And you'd planted a zillion trees on your hillside. The trees grew and grew and grew, and we climbed and looked out to see great distances over Marquez School, Palos Verdes, and Catalina, all places where we had many a great time. And you built a boat in your garage, a blue Sabbath, and then another one, yellow. And you bought the first color TV I ever saw. And we watched cartoons and cowboy shows while you made incredible breakfasts on Saturday mornings. And you rebuilt a TR2, an incredible car, my first and most beautiful. Those were all very cool things, John, and a few of many. And early in life, just at the right time. Thank you, John. Thank you. Safe winds, dear John. Safe winds.